Moses was a shepherd. He lived a simple life. He tended his father-in-law's flocks. Day after day he wandered the desert. He knew the land well. It was a quiet life, but Moses was content. One day, everything changed. Moses had never seen anything like it. The bush blazed with fire, yet it remained unharmed. The flames danced and flickered, but the bush stood strong. Smoke rose into the sky. Moses was drawn to the strange sight. He cautiously approached the bush. As he got closer, he heard a voice. The voice came from the flames. It called out to him, "Moses! Moses!" Moses was astonished. He had never heard a voice like that before. Moses was both curious and afraid. He had been tending his father-in-law's flock in the wilderness when he saw a strange sight. A bush was on fire, but it was not consumed by the flames. This was unlike anything he had ever seen before. His heart raced as he approached the burning bush, drawn by an inexplicable force. What could this mean? He wondered if it was a sign, a message from the divine. His mind was filled with questions, but he knew he had to get closer to understand. He answered the voice. "Here I am," he said. His voice trembled slightly, a mix of reverence and fear. He had never encountered anything like this before. The voice that called out to him was powerful, yet gentle. It seemed to resonate deep within his soul. Moses felt a connection, a calling that he could not ignore. He stood there, waiting for what would come next, his heart pounding in his chest. The voice spoke again. "Do not come any closer," it said. "Take off your sandals." God's presence was holy. The ground on which Moses stood was sanctified by the divine presence. Moses felt a wave of awe and humility wash over him. He realized that he was in the presence of something far greater than himself. The flames of the burning bush seemed to dance with a life of their own, illuminating the sacred moment. Moses obeyed. He removed his sandals. His hands trembled as he untied the straps, feeling the rough texture of the desert sand beneath his feet. The act of removing his sandals was a gesture of respect and submission. He understood that he was standing on holy ground, a place set apart for a divine encounter. The significance of the moment was not lost on him. He stood on holy ground. The air around him seemed to hum with a sacred energy. Every fiber of his being was attuned to the presence of the divine. He felt a profound sense of peace and purpose, as if he was exactly where he was meant to be. The ground beneath his feet was no longer just sand and rock. It was a sacred space, a meeting place between the human and the divine. The voice continued to speak. It said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac." Each name carried weight and history, connecting Moses to his ancestors and their covenant with God. The voice was not just any voice, it was the voice of the Almighty, the creator of heaven and earth. Moses felt a deep sense of belonging and responsibility. He was part of a larger story, a divine plan that spanned generations, and the God of Jacob. Moses trembled. He hid his face. The realization of who he was speaking to overwhelmed him. He felt unworthy to look upon the divine presence. His mind raced with thoughts of his past, his failures, and his doubts. Yet, in that moment, he also felt a glimmer of hope and redemption. The God of his ancestors had chosen to speak to him, to reveal himself in a burning bush. He was afraid to look at God. The fear was not just of the unknown, but of the immense power and holiness that radiated from the burning bush. Moses understood that he was in the presence of the Almighty, and it filled him with both awe and trepidation. He knew that his life would never be the same after this encounter. The voice from the fire had called him, and he had answered. Now he stood on holy ground, ready to listen and obey. God spoke to Moses from the burning bush. It was an extraordinary sight, a bush engulfed in flames, yet not consumed by them. Moses, a humble shepherd, was drawn to this miraculous phenomenon, his curiosity piqued by the divine spectacle. As he approached, a voice called out to him, "Moses, Moses." Startled, he responded, "Here I am." This was no ordinary fire. It was a manifestation of God's presence, a holy ground where Moses was instructed to remove his sandals. The voice from the bush was none other than God himself, revealing his divine plan to Moses. He told Moses to go to Pharaoh. This was a daunting task, as Pharaoh was the most powerful ruler of the time, commanding the vast and mighty Egyptian empire. Moses, who had once lived in the Egyptian palace as a prince, now found himself being sent back to confront the very seat of power he had fled from years ago. The mission was clear: to demand the release of the Israelites who had been enslaved for generations. This was not just a political mission, it was a divine mandate, a call to liberate an entire nation from bondage. God had a special task for Moses. This task was not just about freeing the Israelites. It was about leading them to a promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Moses was to be the instrument of God's will, the leader who would guide his people through the wilderness to their new home. This was a monumental responsibility, one that required immense faith and courage. Moses, a man of deep thought and contemplation, pondered the enormity of the task before him. He knew that this mission would change the course of history. He was to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. Moses was afraid. The fear was palpable as he considered the challenges ahead. Leading a nation of slaves out of the clutches of a powerful empire was no small feat. The journey would be fraught with dangers, both from the Egyptians and from the harsh desert environment. Moses felt the weight of his own inadequacies, questioning his ability to fulfill such a divine mission. The fear of failure loomed large, and the thought of facing Pharaoh's wrath was terrifying. He didn't think he was the right person for the job. Moses doubted his own abilities, feeling unworthy of the task. He was a simple shepherd, not a leader or a warrior. The memories of his past failures haunted him, and he questioned why God would choose him for such an important mission. The doubts gnawed at him, making him feel small and insignificant. He wondered if there was someone more capable, more suited to lead the Israelites to freedom. The uncertainty was overwhelming, and Moses felt lost in the enormity of the task. "Who am I," he asked, "that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" This question echoed in the silence of the desert, a cry of self-doubt and humility. Moses felt unworthy and ill-equipped for the mission. He was acutely aware of his limitations and weaknesses. The task seemed insurmountable, and the thought of confronting Pharaoh was daunting. Moses' question was not just about his own identity, but about his purpose and calling. He sought reassurance and guidance, hoping for a sign that he was indeed the chosen one for this divine mission. "I will be with you," God reassured him. These words were a balm to Moses' troubled soul. God's promise of presence and support was a source of immense comfort. It meant that Moses would not be alone in this journey. He would have divine guidance and strength. The assurance of God's presence gave Moses the courage to face his fears and doubts. It was a reminder that the mission was not just his, but God's. With this divine backing, Moses felt a renewed sense of purpose and determination. He knew that with God by his side, he could overcome any obstacle. God would give Moses the strength he needed. This strength was not just physical, but spiritual and emotional. It was the strength to lead, to inspire, and to persevere. Moses understood that his own abilities were limited, but with God's strength he could achieve the impossible. This divine empowerment was crucial for the journey ahead. He gave Moses the confidence to take the first step, to confront Pharaoh and to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. The promise of strength was a beacon of hope, guiding Moses through the uncertainties and challenges. But Moses still had doubts. Despite the reassurances, the doubts lingered. Moses was human, and the enormity of the task weighed heavily on him. He worried about his ability to convince the Israelites, to gain their trust, and lead them effectively. The fear of failure was ever present, and the thought of letting down his people and God was terrifying. Moses' doubts were a reflection of his humility and his deep sense of responsibility. He knew that the stakes were high and the consequences of failure were dire. He wondered if the Israelites would believe him. This was a significant concern for Moses. The Israelites had been in bondage for so long that the idea of freedom seemed like a distant dream. Convincing them to follow him, to trust in God's plan, was a monumental challenge. Moses feared that his past, his identity, and his message would not be enough to inspire faith and hope in the hearts of his people. He questioned his ability to communicate God's vision and to rally the Israelites for the journey ahead. He questioned if they would accept him as a leader. Acceptance was crucial for the success of the mission. Moses knew that without the trust and support of the Israelites, leading them out of Egypt would be impossible. He worried about their skepticism, their fears and their doubts. Moses' own insecurities were mirrored in his concerns about acceptance. He needed to be seen as a credible and trustworthy leader, someone who could guide them through the trials and tribulations of the journey. The path ahead was uncertain, but with God's guidance, Moses was ready to embrace his destiny. Section 5. A task too great. Moses felt small and insignificant. He was just a shepherd. How could he possibly stand up to Pharaoh? How could he lead the Israelites to freedom? He tried to explain his fears to God. What if they do not believe me? Moses asked. God understood Moses' concerns. He gave Moses signs to show the people. These signs would prove that God had sent him. God promised to be with Moses every step of the way. I will be with you, God repeated. His voice echoed with power and love. God's words filled Moses with a new sense of purpose. He was still afraid, but he knew he wasn't alone. God would be by his side. God would guide him. Moses felt a surge of courage. He bowed his head in acceptance. He was ready to do what God asked. He would put his trust in God. He would face the challenges ahead. The encounter with God at the burning bush changed Moses. It transformed him from a humble shepherd into a courageous leader. He left the familiarity of his life and embraced the unknown. He faced his fears and stepped into his destiny. Moses' story teaches us about the power of faith and courage. It reminds us that God can use anyone to accomplish great things. We may feel inadequate, but with God all things are possible. Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt. He faced many obstacles along the way, but he always remembered God's promise. God was with him. He led with faith and courage. He never gave up. Moses' story is an inspiration to us all. It shows us that God can use ordinary people to do extraordinary things. It reminds us to have faith in God's plan, even when we don't understand it. The burning bush is a reminder that God is present in our lives. It symbolizes the divine presence that is always with us, even in the most desolate and challenging times. Just as the bush burned without being consumed, God's love and guidance are eternal and unending. This powerful image invites us to reflect on the ways in which we experience the divine in our own lives. It calls us to recognize the sacred moments that often go unnoticed in the hustle and bustle of our daily routines. He speaks to us in many ways. Sometimes it's through the gentle whisper of the wind, a quiet nudge in our hearts, or the beauty of a sunset. Other times it's through the words of a friend, a passage in a book, or a moment of stillness. Each of these instances is an invitation to pause and listen, to open our hearts and minds to the divine messages that surround us. In a world filled with noise and distractions, finding these moments of connection can be a profound and transformative experience. He calls us to follow him. This call is not always easy to hear, and it often requires us to step out of our comfort zones. It may lead us down paths we never expected to travel, challenging us to grow and evolve in ways we never imagined. But with each step we take in faith, we draw closer to our true purpose and the fulfillment of our divine potential. The journey may be long and arduous, but it is also filled with moments of grace and revelation. He gives us the courage to face our fears. In the face of adversity, it is easy to feel overwhelmed and uncertain, yet it is precisely in these moments that we are called to trust in the strength and guidance of the divine. With faith as our anchor, we can stand firm against the storms of life, knowing that we are never alone. Each challenge we encounter is an opportunity to deepen our faith and to discover the resilience and courage that lie within us. Are you listening for his voice? In the stillness of prayer and reflection, we create space for the divine to speak to us. It is in these quiet moments that we can hear the whispers of guidance and feel the gentle nudges of inspiration. By cultivating a practice of mindfulness and attentiveness, we become more attuned to the presence of the divine in our lives. This practice not only enriches our spiritual journey, but also brings a sense of peace and clarity to our everyday experiences. We all have a burning bush within us. This inner flame represents our connection to the divine, a source of light and love that resides within each of us. It is a reminder that we are all part of something greater, and that we each have a unique role to play in the unfolding of the divine plan. By nurturing this inner flame, we can bring more light and love into the world, illuminating the path for ourselves and others. It is the fire of God's love. This love is unconditional and ever-present, a guiding force that sustains us through all of life's challenges. It is a source of warmth and comfort, a beacon of hope in times of darkness. By embracing this love, we can find the strength to overcome our fears and the courage to pursue our dreams. It is a transformative power that can heal wounds, mend broken hearts, and bring about profound change in our lives. It burns brightly when we trust in Him. Listen to God's voice. Trusting in the divine requires faith and surrender, a willingness to let go of our fears and doubts. When we place our trust in the divine, we open ourselves to a world of possibilities and miracles. This trust allows the inner flame to burn more brightly, illuminating our path and guiding us towards our highest potential. It is a journey of faith, one that requires patience, perseverance, and an open heart. Let His love guide you. In every decision and action, let the love of the divine be your compass. This love is a source of wisdom and strength, a guiding light that can lead you through even the darkest of times. By aligning your actions with this love, you can create a life that is rich in meaning and purpose. It is a path that leads to fulfillment and joy, a journey that brings you closer to the divine and to your true self. Then, step out in faith and make a difference in the world. Each of us has the power to create positive change, to be a force for good in the world. By stepping out in faith, we can bring the light of the divine into every corner of our lives. This is not just a call to action, but an invitation to live with purpose and intention. It is a reminder that we are all connected and that our actions have the power to inspire and uplift others. So take that step and let your light shine brightly for all to see.